One aspect of arriving at night in a place one does not know is that the mornings are revelatory, and not always for the better. This Saturday, I wake to discover that there's no delightful marine view, a ploy of many a seaside lodging house. Instead, visible from my window is a bricked-in parking lot. An occasional dangling weed or fading rose clings to its walls. I soon learn that the seafront is over a mile away. After a quick breakfast, I think I am the only one present. I push open the hotel's handsome doors and step into a section of town that seems to have absorbed the despondent greyness of the drooping sky. In stark contrast to the residual grandeur of my hotel, one dreary, worn-out building after another totters before me and stumbles down the long, winding high street toward the shore. I wonder if I've made the right decision to come to Felixstowe. Perhaps the college porter's lukewarm response to my choice of destination was appropriate. In quest of the sea and in pursuit of the morning tide, I passed by a working man's café where one can still buy a bacon butty. I wish I had eaten there. Cut-rate businesses such as Poundland, boarded-up establishments, and innumerable charity or thrift shops. As if succumbing to the precipitous slant of the street, the higgledy-piggledy storefronts of Oxfam, the British Red Cross shop, the British Heart Foundation, Cancer Research UK, St. Elizabeth Hospice, YMCA Charity Shop, East Anglia's Children's Hospice, and the Salvation Army lean and almost tumble into one another. Discarded out-of-fashion clothes, unwanted books, worn furniture, superfluous kitchen gadgets, and miscellaneous objects left over from absent or abandoned lives clutter their window displays. To tempt purchasers to step inside, some items stand outside the front doors. I catch sight of a lone, worn teddy bear propped up against the stoop of Oxfam. Wanting to rescue it, I almost purchase it. The stale odor of unwanted shoes, cast-off dresses, tossed-out jackets, and mildewing novels, however, deters me. Drawing closer to the seafront, I also pass a vacant shop that has been hastily converted into a Brexit party headquarters. Dismayed, I hasten by. Eventually, I reach a steep, winding street that leads down past some sort of shabby, unadorned cake shop, a florist, and a pub until I reach a promenade that for nearly 5 precious miles borders the sea. I have arrived. The North Sea is at my feet at last, the sea. The open sea, the blue, the fresh, the ever-free. While gaining my bearings, I listen to the tumbling surf rolling over itself with one consuming roar along the shingle to where the backwater and the next wave mingle. The sea's repetitive, almost hypnotic movements are soothing. They alleviate the bleakness of the morning and, like some massive wet mop sweeping back and forth across a grimy floor, the waves' recurrent motions almost succeed in wiping away my memory of the grubbiness I have earlier witnessed. For the moment, Felixstowe seems a little brighter, less dreary and dejected. Which way shall I turn? The receptionist at the hotel suggested that I go along the promenade to the right on the first day and to the left on the second. So why not? The topographical profile of the seashore is noticeably distinct from what I had seen the previous week in Great Yarmouth. In Felixstowe, instead of the flat broads meeting, if not blending with the sea, lofty cliffs loom and abruptly separate the tide from the town. On top of these cliffs are the remnants of former posh hotels and lodging houses, either recently converted into convalescent homes and private flats, or doomed to become derelict, boarded-up buildings. It's hard to imagine, but from the 1890s until the late 1930s, Felixstowe was a fashionable seaside resort. The German imperial family visited here in 1891. They stayed at what became known as the Millionaire's Hotel. And in 1936, Wallis Simpson resided for a month in Felixstowe so as to claim residence for her divorce from Ernest Simpson, a necessary move so she could marry King Edward VII. Now, like so many other places on this coast, thanks to the brutal intrusion of the Second World War, as well as various fluctuations in economic circumstances, little of that wealth is evident. As the charity shops reveal, the community's superfluity of riches has long ago withdrawn. Furthermore, tourism is down to a minimum. I suspect that in season, the beaches are mainly populated by locals or day trippers from Ipswich. Like other seaside resorts, Felixstowe, from the mid-19th century until the 1950s, used to attract thousands of visitors who would either come by train or, at the turn of the 19th century, travel from London by steamship. A ticket from London to Felixstowe in 1902 via ship cost 3 shillings single and 5 shillings return. Since the trip took 5 hours, there were amusements on board. Deck croquet and thread needle races passed the time away, and so did the popular obstacle race, a far less genteel entertainment, for in addition to having to crawl through barrels, scale a horizontal bar by way of a slack rope, and jump into a container of water, the competitor had to struggle through a tarpaulin coated with soot. Contestants emerged looking like a chimney sweep or a black-faced minstrel, a spectacle that not only elicited the cheers of friends, but also, to some degree, pandered to what was then a popular humor based upon class and racial prejudices. Moving south along the promenade parallel to the North Sea, I feel the autumnal winds chill on my cheeks and delight in watching the waves collapsing and dispersing along the beach. Wandering alone, I am free to take my time and pause whenever I wish. The mid-morning is cloudy and nippy. I'm glad for my stocking cap and down jacket. So I'm not surprised to see only a handful of people strolling or exercising along the promenade. That might not have always been the case, for in the second half of the 19th century, there had been talk of Felixstowe becoming a winter resort. Doctors advocated for this and suggested that seaside holidays in midwinter could be beneficial to one's health. Alert to such advice, cartoonists in Punch had a satirical field day. One comic sketch by Charles Harrison, reproduced in an 1896 Mr. Punch at the Seaside, shows a group of glum holidaymakers sitting on the beach in midwinter while clustered and shivering around hot coal stoves. With wool hats, warm coats, fur scarves and muffs, thick socks and boots, they attempt to carry on with what they might have done in June, July, or August. The children valiantly attempt to dig in the sand. A man huddles over his newspaper. Another sits miserably behind a windscreen. A proprietor attempts to sell hot drinks, and Jones beckons a visitor into a bathing machine that announces midwinter bathing heated with hot water pipes. I presume the customers swam in the machine itself and not in the sea. Now, however, the seafront is almost completely abandoned except for a solitary, deserted ice cream booth solidly bolted shut and perched on a concrete block at the edge of the sea. The forsaken Peter's Ice Cream seems patiently, if not submissively, to be waiting for the tide to take it out. Bands of low, dark clouds hasten its demise. Indeed, soon this landmark will actually disappear, for its 70-year-old proprietor will shortly give up his lease. The brand of ice cream sold since 1890 will become yet another casualty of time. I step onto the lonely sands and walk close to the long wooden groins constructed to thwart the inevitable erosion of the shoreline. While listening to the waves raking the pebbles close to my boots, I reach what was once a popular pleasure pier built in 1906. The sounds of a concert band playing Rossini's William Tell Overture or Kiefert's The Gay Parisienne have long drifted away. During the Second World War, fearing this pier could become a landing point for enemy troops, authorities partially demolished its structure. After that, even though it was rebuilt in late 2017, this pier never regained its original grandeur. All that remains is a recently constructed and predictably noisy amusement hall with an over-18 gambling section at its entrance. Because most of the pier is unsafe, one is allowed only to tread on the first segment of its promenade. A tall metal barrier outlaws anyone from trespassing further and walking to the end. But I wonder if the occasional person does. In spite of the danger, it would be tempting. After passing this landmark, I'm distracted by a group of formal gardens on the other side of Undercliff Road. For 1 kilometer, these meticulously designed gardens hug and ascend the bordering cliffs. Turning my back to the sea, I cross over the road so that I can reach the garden's manicured paths that wind through the symmetrically terraced lawns and shrubbery. Serpentine steps lead to roof enclosures or bentwood benches where a person may sit and gaze at the erratic skies. In 1910, these gardens were designed for the pleasure of visitors who came to the seaside for not only their holidays, but also their health. Strolling through these grounds afforded them an opportunity to take their prescribed exercise while inhaling the healing sea air and feeling the salty breezes caress and occasionally sting their skin. Currently, this area enjoys a place on the National Heritage List for England. But until a decade ago, not all was well. With the precipitous failure of the English seaside, this site, like so many others, was severely neglected and left to perish among a jumble of weeds. Fortunately, in 2011, the Suffolk Coastal District Council started a £4.8 million rejuvenation programme. With additional financial help from the Heritage Lottery Fund, the gardens gradually came back to life. After the restoration of the Edwarding planting scheme, the replacement of the artificial rockwork, the resurfacing of the paths, and repairs to the historic pavilion, as well as to the damaged lawns and hedges, the garden furniture, and the various water features fed by natural springs gushing out of the cliff face. The feature reopened in November 2015. Currently, special coach tours bring people just to see these terrace gardens nestled in the cliffs that come down to the sea. And friends of the garden work diligently to maintain their pristine condition. Now, in mid-November 2019, I stroll through the plantings of holm oak, hebe, yucca, looks like a palm tree, Evonymus escalonus, and other varieties of evergreen, as well as what remains of the flowering shrubs and the occasional clusters of red berries. There's a certain satisfaction at looking at this display of tamed nature, but the contrast between the garden's all too carefully bedded shrubs, held hostage behind terraced walls so as to conform to some master plan, and the invigorating view of the sea's continuous, restless metamorphosis does not escape my attention. In the end, I'm all too glad to walk away from this still life landscape, cross the road, and once more gaze upon the wild, ever-moving, irregular, unpredictable, capricious, deadly, yet life-giving sea. Close by these gardens is the circular Felixstowe Spa Pavilion, a theatre, bar, and café area. First opened in 1909, then damaged from bombing, and eventually abandoned when large groups of holidaymakers ceased coming to Felixstowe. Following the all-too-familiar subsequent pattern of loss and recovery that has dogged my solitary walks elsewhere, the facility closed in 2013 and was, with the help of the government, Cultural Recovery Fund, restored and reopened in 2015. During warmer seasons, the place now hosts popular musicals, dances, comedy shows, and band concerts. Now when I go by, all is silent and padlocked, waiting for the return of the whispers of the summer sea. As I move along the seafront promenade, the topography alters. The tall cliffs, so prominent at the beginning of my walk, give way to the broad, flat landscape seen in places like Great Yarmouth. Where I tread, during powerful, destructive storms, waves crash over the groins and seize the shore. There's a long history of the sea's greed that snatches and swallows this land. It is said that a Roman villa is somewhere buried nearby in unforgiving depths. Recently, rocks have been piled up to reinforce what protection there is and keep the area safe from the surging sea. Here, massive floodgates border the streets to save the houses and businesses from damage and destruction. All too aware of the coming rise in ocean levels, I wonder what the future might bring. The promenade continues, but becomes rougher underfoot. The sea draws closer. Sandy grit scatters over and becomes embedded in the cracked concrete. The surroundings are more isolated. Except for the occasional dog walker, I see no one except for fishermen waiting to reel in some whiting, the desired catch of the season. Worrying that the promenade is coming to a dead end, I ask a lone walker to give me some sense of where I am and what's ahead. Obligingly, she informs me that if I continue to the end of the promenade and turn inland, I shall come to a nature reserve, and then to Harwich, where the rivers Otter and Deben join and flow into the sea to form a harbour where enormous shipping containers unload and load their cargo. Much to my relief, she adds, that adjoining the port is a café when one can get a hot lunch. Much needed, for I'm feeling peckish and uncomfortably chilled. Needless to say, I carry on and follow the shore that bends to create a ragged, arching peninsula of blown dunes and grasses. Centuries ago, this area was an island until a tongue of shingle drifted in and gradually filled the space between the island and mainland. I presume I am close to the 81-acre nature reserve that offers protection to rare plants, migrating birds, and common lizards. I'm sorry neither to have the time nor the energy to explore this region so that I might wander close to its rare, undisturbed, vegetated shingle habitat, which provides a breeding ground for ringed plovers. These birds feign a broken wing in order to lead predators away from their eggs or young. But perhaps I might catch sight of a rabbit grazing on the area's coarse grass, or meet an enthusiast watching for migrating birds. I would have liked to amble along the peninsular seashore to see starfish, barnacles, and sea anemones, but instead, plodding on, I follow a path that cuts across the sands and after half an hour leads me to tall steel fences that border the shipping port and keep the unauthorized out. The natural world presses up to the barrier's edge, but finds no entry into an extensive landscape ruled by commerce and watched over by gigantic gantry cranes that almost seem mightier than the open sea. On my way, I notice at the tip of the peninsula a sprawling citadel. This, I learn later, is the Land Guard Fort, originally conceived in 1543, later modified in the 17th century, rebuilt in the 18th and 19th centuries, and substantially added to in the 20th century. For hundreds of years, this fort has defended this part of the East Anglia coast. In particular, during both World Wars, the citadel played an important defensive and anti-aircraft role. Later, in 1952, part of the fort was converted into a Cold War control room. Finally, in 1957, the fort was disarmed and closed. Now, like so many key places, this historical complex of tunnels, passageways, and rooms functions as a museum run by English Heritage. Because time is passing, it's the middle of the afternoon and it's growing darker, I decide not to trudge out of my way to approach its entrance. I rationalize it might not be open. I feel slightly guilty and, in retrospect, disappointed in myself for not trying. Thank heavens, I soon reach an uneven but still functioning road and notice signs for the Viewpoint Café. I approach its front door. The place is open. The interior's warmth and the enticing odors of cooking draw me in, and so does a sign for the toilets. In winter, seaside public lavatories are closed shut. After ordering a piping hot plate of fish and chips with mushy peas, I find a table close to the picture windows where one can gaze at the container ships entering the deep water port in order to unload and receive goods. It is fascinating to watch the huge, towering, ship-to-shore cranes with their mighty, monstrous arms picking up containers and then precisely either loading them on the backs of lorries or stacking them on top of others, waiting to be shipped. Choreographed like an intricate, graceful dance, the cranes glide along tracks, the waiting lorries slide into place, and the containers balance in the air. All is coordinated by computer programs and skillful operators. It's a work of art. I cannot help but remember, though, that 39 refugees from Vietnam recently died here while being smuggled into England in one of these containers. And perhaps not all is as graceful as it seems, for as I write this, the workers are striking in a row about pay. Outside the café, a few hardy customers sit with their dogs and gaze at the spectacle. Opened in 1886, Felixstowe Port is the busiest global container port in Britain and the fourth largest in Europe. At least 3,000 ships representing at least 17 shipping lines come each year, among which are the large containers that are 230 feet wide and 1,312 feet long. Here is another world. I learn that this area is separated not only by its tall, impenetrable fences, but also by its administration. It has its own police, ambulance, and fire services. Much to my amazement, I also learn that the port sits on land owned by Trinity College, Cambridge. The college's wealth is no wonder. Indeed, one of the terminals is named Trinity Terminal. In fact, a few months later, in February 2020, just before I leave Cambridge to return to Buffalo, I walk by a demonstration organized by the Extinction Rebellion, a conservation group protesting Trinity College's decision to sell off the port's adjoining farmland so that a large industrial site, a bigger lorry park, and a housing development could be constructed. Wanting to save the wildlife, to prevent the destruction of nature in that area, and oppose the college's ties with fossil fuel companies, the protesters not only march in the streets of Cambridge, but also dig up a lawn at Trinity. The college, I understand, still went ahead with its plans. After resting and eating, I start my return. On the way back, once I rejoin the open sea, I pass by locked bath huts, admire a group of 5 friends, warmly dressed, sitting on the seawall while enjoying the remains of the day. They too appear to find comfort in the sea. And I catch sight of a random fisherman gazing wistfully at the surging of the tide. Alone and dependent on no one, he gazes at the sea as it advances before his eyes. The clouds are gathering closer and lower, so by the time I have returned to where in the morning I had entered the seafront and have climbed back up to the high street, trod once more by the charity shops and cafes, and finally caught sight of the Orwell Hotel, all the world has gone home for tea and toast. Hardly a soul is out. Little is visible except for an occasional light in a window. Being November, darkness descends around 3 p.m. It's now about 5 o'clock. Too tired to search for a restaurant, I decide to eat dinner in the hotel dining room. With some ingenuity, putting on a necklace, a clean blouse, discarding my hiking boots, and brushing my hair, I try to make myself look more respectable. It is Saturday night, after all. And I'm glad I do, for the dining room is far more grand than I had initially realized. Glistening chandeliers hang elegantly from a decorated ceiling. Their lights illuminate tables covered with white linen cloths and set with fine glasses and silverware. When I enter, a black tie waiter shows me to my seat. I look around and realize to my discomfort that I am the only person there. Shortly, a pianist appears. He sits in his tux at a grand piano and serenades my demure plate of roast lamb. His popular renditions of themes from Chopin serenade the emptiness, but the love songs are out of place. I cannot help momentarily identifying with the elderly nun, the last of her order, who, in Betjeman's poem about Felixstowe, returns to her rooms and makes her loneliness complete by putting her final shilling in the heater. Eventually, a small party of people arrive and order a meal. I am relieved. Being solitary is not always desirable.